This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Thursday, September 10th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. The clinical trial of one of the most promising vaccines for the coronavirus has been halted after one of the participants fell ill. However, scientists say there may be no link between the vaccine and the participant's illness. Henry Ridgewell reports from London.
Pharmaceutical firm AstraZeneca announced the pause of the trial Wednesday after one of the British participants fell ill, reportedly with transverse myelitis, inflammation of the spinal cord. The participant is expected to recover. The coronavirus vaccine developed by AstraZeneca and Oxford University is seen as one of the most promising of dozens under development around the world. After successful early-stage trials, it had moved to phase 3 testing in recent weeks, involving 30,000 participants in the United States, Britain, Brazil and South Africa. Scientists emphasize that there is no indication yet that the participants' illness is linked to the vaccine.
You're giving the vaccine to very large numbers of people, and at any given time, randomly by chance, it's quite possible some of those participants may have health problems that happen to come up. So I think it's normal to expect to see these events, and what's critical is to then pause and to investigate in more detail.
That investigation is underway, though it's not clear how long it might take. Britain's health minister sought to assure the public.
It just shows how much of an emphasis we put on the safety of the vaccine, even though, of course, we're all desperate to see it work.
This week, 9 leading US and European vaccine developers issued a pledge to uphold safety standards for their vaccines. The US government launched Operation Warp Speed earlier this year, with almost $10 billion of funding to accelerate the development of a vaccine with a target date of January next year. The US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has told health departments across the country to draft vaccination plans by October. Globally, there are at least 7 vaccines undergoing phase 3 trials involving thousands of participants.
It's a slow process because it depends on how many people are being infected. And of course, that's spread across various different regions. And in different regions, you know that the number of cases every given week is varying from week to week.
Even if a vaccine is approved, scientists say it will take time to roll out.
We need to make large amounts of the vaccine. We need to fill it into little glass vials, and then we need to distribute it and then work out how to actually vaccinate people.
To date, only one vaccine has been approved, the so-called Sputnik 5 in Russia, which the government says will be rolled out to the Russian population starting in October. Experts have raised concerns about the vaccine's safety, as it has not entered phase 3 clinical trials. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
Kensani Nkuna is a volunteer in AstraZeneca's experimental coronavirus vaccine trial in South Africa, and she hopes to save the world. Colette Luke has the latest.
27-year-old Kensani Nkuna is a volunteer in AstraZeneca's experimental coronavirus vaccine trial in South Africa. She is one of some 2,000 volunteers in South Africa taking part in a trial that they hope will lead to a potential life-saving vaccine.
I wanted to be part of the solution. I wanted to serve the world because this thing is destroying people.
The trial, however, was paused globally this week after an unexplained illness in a participant. Nkuna, a mother of a toddler who lives in one of Johannesburg's townships, says she's not worried because she hasn't had any symptoms, but admits her family and friends didn't want her to volunteer.
My mother was not happy at first because she thought that, what if I can die? What if I can get sick or anything can happen to me? People have their views and opinions, but me, I would say the vaccine is a good thing. It can save the world.
Another volunteer, 32-year-old Robyn Porteous, shares Nakuna's sentiment.
I just decided there's no point being afraid. I don't want to make this whole experience something that's just grounded in fear. I think it's an important thing to do, and so I'm going to stay positive until maybe there's something that, causes concern. But it can be scary, but trying to be positive.
The vaccine, developed with the University of Oxford, has been described by the World Health Organization as probably the world's leading candidate and the most advanced in terms of development. South Africa has also been in talks with Johnson & Johnson and Novavax to conduct other experimental vaccine trials. Testing of new medical interventions in Africa is often controversial, though. After the continent's first COVID-19 trial was announced, anti-vaccine activists protested against Africans being used as test subjects.
I always cry.
But Porteous, who acknowledged the criticism, said she participated because the clinical trials could help South Africa secure access to a vaccine.
And I do understand, the history of medical testing in Africa. I do understand the perception of, possibly seeing Africans as being treated like guinea pigs. But I think, as I've said, in order for us to get data that is South African specific, that ensures that when the vaccine rolls out, it is something that works for South Africans, that makes this vitally important.
Reuters' Colette Luke with that report. Reports of domestic violence in at least 14 American cities have risen sharply since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, a new study confirms. VOA's Veronica Balderas Iglesias examined how the virus has increased the risk of abuse and what victims and the groups that help them are doing to stop the violence.
Everyone always says, oh, well, why didn't that person just leave? They must, somehow like secretly this treatment. But the truth is, abuse is a cycle.
It was like living with a ticking bomb, says this survivor of domestic violence, who did not want her name used for safety reasons.
I finally reached the point where I felt that if I did not leave the marriage, that I would be dead within a year, either because he would have killed me, I might have committed suicide, or the stress of living in the situation was so severe that I would get cancer or something like that.
But that was before the pandemic. Her full-time job in an office and the ability to have face-to-face contact with friends and relatives helped her get out of danger. Now, with COVID-19, it is harder than ever for victims of domestic abuse to break free.
We see more abusers using COVID as a technique to hold power and control over their victims. So they'll either not let someone leave the house and threaten them, if you leave, you can't come back in because you'll have COVID, or not letting them leave the house in the first place.
What we've noticed is that we're serving the same number of people, but the situations are so much more dangerous. Cases involving strangulation, cases involving firearms, cases involving other weapons. We've seen a massive increase in these types of cases.
At least 14 cities have seen an uptick in domestic abuse reports, according to researchers.
We used calls made to the police during 2020, and then we compared them with calls during 2019, and we found that the increase was about 7.5% during March, April, and May. Most areas and most racial groups and income groups had similar effect sizes, and we found evidence of large increases for new households.
What worries prosecutors even more is that victims, especially minors, can't seek help.
Children who may have been able to go to school and perhaps report what's happening in their home are now doing remote learning. So there's no opportunity to speak to that trusted adult in their school to let them know what's happening in their home.
But help is still available.
I'm just going to start off by gathering a little bit of information from you.
Victims can call hotlines. They can seek protective orders from authorities. And therapists at groups like Doorways are available online.
We work on creating a safety plan to identify triggers, to identify unsafe locations, whether that be, if they see that their partner is becoming escalated, moving out of the kitchen, because that's where weapons can be.
The survivor says healing is possible, but it takes courage and patience to break out of an abusive cycle.
These situations have a way of destroying your soul and making you doubt everything about yourself. So what I would say is be gentle with yourself. Don't think that there's something wrong with you if you got out 3 months ago and you're not walking on clouds. It takes a very long time. I'm still a work in progress, as we all are.
Verónica Valderas Iglesias for VOA News, Chevy Chase, Maryland.
Even before the coronavirus pandemic, there were more children out of school in Nigeria than any other country in the world. One charity is using technology to make sure the most vulnerable pupils don't miss their chance of an education. Angela Okumadu reports.
Each morning, Esther Ikechukwu builds a desk outside her home in a Lagos slum. 2 upturned buckets and a handbag to rest her tablet on. Her balancing act complete, she's ready for school.
Try to protect ourselves while online.
Even before lockdown, Nigeria had more children out of school than any other country in the world. 13 million, according to the United Nations. But with schools shut since March, it is students like Esther living in the Makoko slum with few social safety nets whose future is most at risk. Trying to fill the void is Lagos-based charity Slum to School.
That was last week Friday.
It provided Esther with a tablet and headset and also provides teachers with laptops for remote learning sessions.
The fact is that I miss school, but what Slum to School is doing right now makes me not to kind of miss school like that, because I'm not really missing. I'm better than some other children out there.
So that you fact check everything.
Around 7 miles away, Slum to School founder Otto Orondam is delivering Esther's lesson from the charity's virtual learning center.
And we do not necessarily have to wait until there's a classroom to put them. Those kids can still learn in their community.
He says long breaks from schools can cut poorer children out of education as they are pushed to work to support their families. For Esther, the technology means she can take an early morning class before trading at her mother's kiosk. But the setup has some difficulties. Esther's outdoor desk is a solution for weak internet signal inside, and the slum's lack of power means it is a challenge to charge electronics.
Class on time.
Slum to School tries to combat the electricity issues by providing power banks and solar charging kiosks.
That was Angela Okumadu of Reuters reporting. Coming up, a cry for help in northern Nigeria as bandits terrorize villagers with impunity. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54. With the campaigns entering its post-Labor Day 2-month stretch to the U.S. election, both President Donald Trump and Democratic nominee Joe Biden are ramping up travel to battleground states this week. On Friday, both men are expected to be in Pennsylvania to commemorate the 9/11 attacks, the closest that the candidates have been to one another in months. VOA's White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara has this report.
President Donald Trump travels to 5 battleground states this week: Florida, North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Nevada. He has resumed outdoor rallies in front of thousands of people, saying they're no different than the ongoing Black Lives Matter protests.
If you're willing to riot and stand on top of each other's face and do whatever the hell you want to do, you're allowed to do that because you're considered a peaceful protester. So we decided to call all our rallies peaceful protests.
Meanwhile, Democratic nominee Joe Biden meets supporters in small socially distanced groups, including in Pennsylvania earlier this week.
So tell me about Joe.
Biden's campaign relies heavily on virtual events, seeking to portray their candidate as an empathetic leader who avoids putting people in harm's way.
Someone who will be at more intimate events and will listen to what people have to say. And that's part of the social justice aspect as well as the medical and economic aspects of his message. Whereas President Trump wants the big crowds. He wants to show that he has the support from what he calls the silent majority of Americans, and that he is in this race and he still has a lot of followers.
On a Wednesday campaign event in Michigan, Biden slammed Trump with revelations from a forthcoming book by journalist Bob Woodward of the president admitting on tape in February that he downplayed the risk of the coronavirus to avoid causing panic.
He had the information. He knew how dangerous it was. And while this deadly disease ripped through our nation, he failed to do his job on purpose. It was a life and death betrayal of the American people.
We don't want to have to show panic. We're not going to show panic. And that's exactly what I did. And I was very open, whether it's to Woodward or anybody else.
Polls show voters are motivated by the pandemic and that most Americans are unhappy with Trump's handling of the coronavirus, something the Biden campaign is eager to highlight. But while Trump is trailing Biden in the polls nationally, the margins are razor thin, particularly in some battleground states.
4 more years! Yeah, we get 4 more years. Guaranteed we're going to get 4 more years.
The Trump campaign has resumed traditional activities, including setting up local offices around the country and canvassing door to door. Biden advisors insist that their strategy of focusing on the pandemic and the economy, targeting different coalitions and affinity groups, is working. Still, some Democrats are nervous.
They're creating some enthusiasm with their events, and they are still knocking doors that because we're taking the pandemic so seriously, we're not doing. I am concerned that that's going to put us at a disadvantage.
On Friday, both Trump and Biden are scheduled to commemorate the anniversary of 9/11 in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the crash site of United Flight 93, one of the airplanes hijacked by the terrorists. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News.
In a show of defiance against Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, Ethiopia's northern Tigray region held elections on Wednesday. Abiy called the regional vote illegal, but says the government will not respond with force. Ethiopia had planned to hold national and regional elections on August 29th, but postponed them indefinitely due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Tigray opposition politicians say the action was taken by Abiy to extend his rule, so they proceeded with a vote, even after senior lawmakers ruled it unconstitutional. The confrontation with Tigray is the latest problem for Abiy, who is struggling to hold together Ethiopia's 80-plus ethnic groups. In Nigeria's isolated northern villages, a human rights group says nightfall is fraught with terror as bandits terrorize residents. Osai Ojigo, Amnesty International's Nigeria director, is calling for action to end what she says is a cycle of impunity, perpetuating more violence in northern Nigeria, where no one is held accountable for crimes against villagers. She spoke to VOA Salam Solomon and begins by describing what the villagers tell Amnesty's researchers on the scene about what they're experiencing in their communities.
Most of them, their farmlands were raided, so it meant that people came into their land and then uprooted their produce. Cattle was stolen, and in order to instill fear, certain fires were set either on the farmlands or in the homes. So quite a number of villages have been razed down, and so that means even when they left, people didn't have homes to go back to. Where they resisted or they were able to organize their own groups, mostly young people who formed some sort of militia groups in order to push back the attacks. They came out with sticks and farming appliances like cutlasses and bows and arrows. But then they found that these guys had guns, and they had sophisticated guns like AK-47 as well, which is really quite shocking. So they couldn't match the kind of weapons they had with their own little effort in order to push back the attacks. What was really disturbing is when people's homes were raided, and then the men are targeted, and then they are shot at, and then they use machetes and cutlasses in order to inflict very serious wounds. And there have been cases of children, even as young as babies, being shot at and killed in the attacks that ensued. So it really is quite shocking, the violence that they've experienced, even when they are not armed. The armed mercenaries seem to want to inflict as much pain and brutality as much as possible. And some of the communities are quite shocked by this experience because they weren't expecting it to escalate to this level. And that's why they have this sense of abandonment, like our government has forgotten about us. Is it because we're in the villages, we're in the backyard, they can't see us? Maybe we need to move to the city so they can see and hear our pain. And they're even calling to their representatives that sit in the national houses of assembly. You need to do something about what is happening to us back in the villages. Sadly, we don't know of anybody, any person who has been held to account for this violence, even if it's by catching those who have killed people. And that is the big question mark in the entire process. Who are these bandits? People have said, are they spirits? Do they disappear in the night? They must be traceable. Why is it so difficult for the authorities to find them? And I think that they need to do a lot more for people to see. So it's not enough for the government to say we're trying our best, we're equipping our soldiers and our police officers. They need to effect arrests and investigate these crimes. Amnesty International believes that this is one of the reasons why the violence has probably escalated to this point, because it's impunity. If people are not brought to justice, then they know they can get away with it, so they'll keep perpetuating it. So this needs to change, and they need to act on it strongly.
That was VOA Salem Salmon speaking to Osai Ojigo, Amnesty International's Nigeria director. The Rwandan National Public Prosecution Authority has taken control of the case against Paul Rusesabagina from the Rwanda Investigation Bureau. Rusesabagina, the man portrayed in the Oscar-nominated movie Hotel Rwanda, was arrested in August for allegedly committing acts of terrorism, arson, kidnapping, and murder. In the movie, Rusesabagina, in his role as a hotel manager, protected Tutsis during Rwanda's civil war. David Rugaza, one of Rusesabagina's lawyers, says Rusesabagina is in good spirit and that authorities have allowed him to speak with his wife and children. The second group of about 500 Burundi refugees in Rwanda are to be repatriated Thursday from the Mahama refugee camp. The first group, which was repatriated on August 20th, also numbered about 500. Rwanda is host to about 150,000 refugees, with about 48% of them from Burundi. Elise Vilchalan, the External Relations Officer for UNHCR Rwanda, says some of the refugees petitioned to return home following Burundi's peaceful election. Vilchalan also says the returning refugees passed COVID-19 tests before being cleared to return. Vilchalan added that the UNHCR is facilitating the voluntary repatriation with resettlement cash assistance. Anxiety and confusion are gripping Zimbabwe's black farmers after the government's announcement that it would return land to some white farmers who were kicked off their land under former President Robert Mugabe. As Columbus Mavunga reports from Harare, authorities are seeking to reassure resettled black farmers in what some fear may be a reversal of land reforms.
Henry Von Pesselt lost his land in 2001 as Zimbabwe's government adopted a sweeping land reform policy and began forcing whites off their farms. Now he may get it back thanks to an agreement between the German and Zimbabwean governments to protect private investments in their respective countries, known as Bilateral Investment Promotion and Protection Agreement, which the Zimbabwean government had ignored when it took the land. The German national took Zimbabwe's government to the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes. The arbitration court based in Washington ordered the Zimbabwean government to pay compensation to Von Pesselt. He is cautiously optimistic following the government's announcement last week that it would give back land to some white farmers.
It's a very positive step that the government recognizes its international obligations. However, we've had many such announcements before, and we will be looking for deeds rather than words, and we'll be interested to see what government actually does.
The Commercial Farmers Union, which represented white farmers in Zimbabwe, refused to comment on the latest announcement by the government. Back in July, Zimbabwe's government signed an agreement with the union to pay $3.5 billion in compensation to white commercial farmers who lost their land, although it remains unclear how the government will raise the money. 63-year-old Emiliana Duri, a former Zimbabwean soldier, is one of those that received part of Von Petzel's land in 2001. She hopes the government's repossession of land will not affect her.
It would be painful that the land that we fought for, I am being asked to pave way for a white person when he had left. It's really painful. I will then start to ask, what did I fight for? It's the land only, so I must not be displaced, even for another black person, because there is no one who is more important than the other. We are all equal, so it's painful.
Zimbabwe's government says only 3% of those resettled will be affected by the new announcement. The rest of the white farmers will be paid for developments they made on their former properties. The government, meanwhile, wants farmers to concentrate on preparing for the 2020-2021 agricultural season, which began last week with tobacco planting.
We now need to move to a second stage, which is ensuring that we increase agricultural productivity, we increase production, and we increase profitability so that agriculture becomes a business, so that this country moves its way up into food security territory now into the future.
Government critics say Zimbabwe's agriculture, once the backbone of the economy, went into free fall when Mugabe confiscated land from white commercial farmers and gave it to inexperienced blacks like Luri. The government attributes the decline to recurring droughts, which it blames on global climate change. Columbus Mavunga for VOA News, Harare.
That's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.